Jalen Hurts has the chance to do something in 2024. No Philadelphia Eagles quarterback has done in at least 15 years. We'll get into what that is and more coming up on this Wednesday edition of the Locked On Eagles podcast.
You are Locked On Eagles, your daily Philadelphia Eagles podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Thanks so much for making Locked On Eagles your first listen each and every day. What's up, Eagles fans? Welcome into this Wednesday edition of the show. I'm Louis DiBiase, joined as always for 6 years straight now, starting today, my co-host Gino Camilleri. We're brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use our code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms do apply. Yeah, it's crazy, Gino. 6 years ago today, we did a trade scenarios pod. In 2018, the offseason right after the Eagles won the Super Bowl, and that was your first show. And here we are 6 years later, heading into season 7.
It's still surreal to me that we get to do this for now over 1,400 episodes, countless live streams on draft day, Bleacher
Only the true
Report.
sickos have listened to that many shows of ours.
And I still remember walking into Buff State. We're sitting in the radio room there, and we put together a show that would be the first of many. And I just want to thank everybody who's ever listened. Over 3 million people have listened or viewed us over these 6 years, and all because we love this team in green. And Lou, I just want to say how everything is meant to be. I became an Eagles fan it's 2 times in the last 20 years that they beat Seattle. And it happened to be one game that I was watching them that they beat Seattle in this 20-year period. And it was the one game I became a fan.
And
then all of a
got
sudden,
in quick because they didn't beat Seattle after that.
No, and then fast forward a couple years later, they get to a Super Bowl. You and I are at the same Super Bowl watch party. 2 kids who live 15 minutes from each other in Buffalo are hosting this show, man.
It's one of the most unique, like the fact that 2 dudes from Western New York were at the same spot for the Eagles' first championship, and then we ended up doing a podcast that's now lasted 7 years. Is, you know, it's a really cool story. So we appreciate everybody that's tuned in for that long or however long you've been listening and making us your first listen each and every day. Have had a lot of quarterbacks throughout the years on this podcast. And, you know, that's the one thing as an Eagles fan growing up that I've experienced is instability at quarterback. Of course, you had Donovan McNabb for a long time, but I was born in 1997. So my era of when I was really getting into football, I thought it was going to be Kevin Kolb, then Michael Vick, then Nick Foles, Sam Bradford, Carson Wentz, Nick Foles again, now Jalen Hurts. And he did throw his first interception today in camp, by the way. It was his last day of practice.
Cut him. Kick him off the team.
I feel like he was throwing a bone to the defense. Like, it was almost more insulting that he would give them a pick the last day than not doing it at all. But so he didn't throw a pick. But one thing he can do this year, Gino, to that point about instability at quarterback, he does have, I was thinking about it today, he has a chance to be the first quarterback since McNabb 15 years ago that has strung together 3+ years of like solid, like, you know what you're getting year in and year out, at least top 10 level of play at quarterback. Now, there's times where he can be top 3, like 2022, like the beginning, or I'd say the midway point of 2023. But you know there's a floor there. And they haven't had that franchise quarterback. As much as I loved Carson Wentz, 2018 to 2020, there were some highs, but there were also a lot of low lows. You never knew what you were getting. And that's with every quarterback they've had. So he has an opportunity this year, because it would be that 3rd year of being a top-tier player, to bring that stability that we haven't seen since 2008.
I think just about once a decade, you kind of get that guy, right? Like you had Jaws for a little bit, and then you had Randall, and then you had Donovan, and then all of a sudden, here comes a combination of Carson Wentz and Jalen Hurts. And I think the comparison with Jalen and Donovan, it's very, very similar, because if you look at Donovan, the one thing you were always going to get was that floor, like you talked about. And even outside of the year when they did have Terrell Owens, you knew that with an underperforming unit at wide receiver, your quarterback was going to elevate you, because he was doing things on the run that nobody had seen. He was able to just prolong plays, and he was willing to take shots down the field. And I would like to see if Donovan played in this modern day, how he would translate. I think it would be a very cool comparison to see how teams would scout him. But the one thing you got in and year out after 1999, until they got rid of him when he went to Washington, at a minimum, you were able to compete, not just for the division, you were going to have a chance to compete for the conference year in and year out. And I think that's the closest that we have been with Jalen Hurts, because like you said, with Carson, it was 1 year. 2016, we kind of saw what was coming. 2017, it was the year.
And then you had some
18,
highs
19, and 20. It was a roller coaster.
The
Jalen's at least
crazy.
showing you some sense of the word stability, and that's exactly what it was.
No, I totally agree. And I think this year, if he returns to MVP form, that will be 3, because he's really been consistently good since the beginning of 2021. Of course, he's been a franchise level quarterback since 2022, but that hasn't been the case. Like, the Eagles have had MVP years, and then the guy falls off and completely regresses. Can you say that's maybe what could be on the path based on last year's Jalen Hurts? Sure, but first off, he's had the best training camp maybe in Eagles history for a quarterback this year, so I think it's going to go the opposite way. But also, last year's quote-unquote regression for Jalen, nowhere near the regression of a Carson Wentz, or heck, even a Nick Foles or a Michael Vick. Like, last year was still, there's a floor there where you're still getting a top 10 quarterback 90% of the time. So, yeah, it's rare for me. Like, this will be the first time ever, if he does it this year and he gets back to where he was last year at the beginning of the season and all of 2022, where I feel like I don't have to worry about the quarterback for a long time. And of course, he's got to do it. We got to see it on the field. But yeah, that'd be the first time since I was like a young kid I've seen that.
I think when I go on Twitter as of recently, I've seen this clear divide of the people that lived through those years and the people that didn't live through those years. And I love our podcast because that was what I was raised on. And it's for me, every single year you knew you were going to be able to compete. For you, it's like, I don't know, we're throwing crap at a wall, hoping something sticks. But to just put in a sense of what Donovan was able to do, even in the down years. In 2006, of course, he tears his ACL, but in the years that they didn't push for an NFC championship, they were at least competing to go to the playoffs year in and year out. You were saying week 16, week 17, we're going to be in a big time football game, and Donovan is probably going to put us in a position to succeed. And then you look at the end of his tenure, Lou, he was pushing for an NFC championship, heck, 10 plus years into his career. If you can get even 75% of that with Jalen Hurts, let's say a 8 to 9 year career out of him, and heck, we're already almost 33+% of the way there, Lou. If this trajectory continues, that's probably the closest comparison that we'll see in our lifetime for a quarterback along those lines. And that's the expectation for Donovan after he established himself after that 2000 season. It was the expectation we're going to compete for the playoffs every single year. Jalen Hurts, once he was named the starter, going from 2-5 to get that team to a playoff, the expectation every single year was that you are going to get to that spot. Now, with Jalen Hurts, it's how can he elevate from good to great on a constant basis, because that's where we want him to be. We don't just want him to be among the regular Joes, just a guy. You want him to be competing with the upper echelon guys, which he has been, Lou. Over the last couple of years, look at the big games he's played with these top quarterbacks. He's put up a pretty darn good record to show.
I think not throwing an interception until the last day of practice. And again, I'm not a training camp stat guy like a couple beat reporters are, but it is incredible that he was that mistake-free. But also, Gino, it wasn't in a Kenny Pickett, Sam Bradford way where he was still connecting every single practice down the field with Devontae Smith, Dallas Goedert, A.J. Brown, Saquon Barkley at times. Like, it might have been the most efficient camp that I've heard an Eagles quarterback had since Wentz in 2017. I think this might top that.
The one thing you want to do each day in camp is get a little bit better, but you don't have to make mistakes to get better. Jalen Hurts, I'm sure he was learning every single day on the job, and that's why he was getting better. So you're going to give him negative marks because he's just reading at a quicker rate than the defense.
National media members try to spin it like it's a negative that he was mistake-free.
Yeah, now he throws an interception, kick him off the team. Like, you can't win with the national media, so that's why you got to stick to us here at Lockdown. And the one thing that we're going to tell you is that if he does come out and there is a clear drop-off, like there was last year,
right? I
don't think there is going to be, but if there is, we might be in Carson Wentz territory. But I think we are much closer on the scale of Eagles quarterback lore to the Donovan McNabb perspective when it comes to Jalen Hurts than we are to the Carson Wentz portion of said meter. So
I agree.
with Jalen, one mistake all of camp, it goes to show that this system that Nick Sirianni is throwing out there where he doesn't want to play his starters has worked. You look, he's only been on the field really one time in the past 3 preseasons. If he's looking that good in camp and you know he has that command of the offense, if they were to put him into a preseason game just to see if he could run the offense, and it does look skeptical, that's where you should have some questions. But for an established coaching staff, Nick Sirianni is an established coach in this league. He's been to the playoffs many times. To feel confident in that offense, in a brand new offense, which is not easy to understand,
especially
you have
when
to
it's
feel
like
confident of QB1.
Your number 6 or 7th new offense since like college. That's what's even more impressive about all this is Jalen looks this good in yet another offense with yet another play caller. And this offense is very different than what he's used to. He's not used to multiple reads, under center, pre-snap motion, a lot of responsibility at the line of scrimmage where he's calling out things as opposed to Jason Kelsey or your coaches on the sidelines in college. And that's what makes it even more impressive that he's been so efficient and aggressive at the same time throughout training camp. And I do think he's going to ball out this year, and he's going to establish himself as the first Eagles franchise quarterback since Donovan McNabb. And I think that's where we're headed. It's got to see it on the field, but I think that is the trajectory. Coming up next right here on the Locked On Eagles podcast, want to get into something similar. What units, outside of Jalen Hurts, need to start off the fastest in 2024 for the Eagles to have success? We'll get into that coming up next right here on Locked On Eagles. Locked On Eagles is brought to you by FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. We all have something on FanDuel rocking for the NFL season, whether it's a Jalen Hurts MVP bet, Quinyon Mitchell for Rookie of the Year, Saquon or AJ or Devontae for Offensive Player. But FanDuel is getting you something a little bit different now through September 22nd. All FanDuel customers can bet $5, and you're going to get a 3-week free trial of NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. So on top of winning those bets, you're going to get a 3-week free trial just by making a $5 bet. Then with a YouTube TV base plan, you'll be able to watch every regular season Sunday afternoon out-of-market game. All you need is a Google account and a current form of payment, and you can cancel anytime. So go bet on the Eagles, the Phillies, maybe a future on the 76ers through FanDuel, and get that 3-week free trial of NFL Sunday Ticket. FanDuel, the America's #1 sportsbook and the official sports betting partner of the Locked On Podcast Network. Thanks so much for making Locked On Eagles your first listen each and every day. Make sure your second listen is the Locked On Fantasy Football Podcast. I have my fantasy draft this Saturday. Been listening to the show on the daily, making sure I can get my 4th ring. My brother, one of my best friends, we've all got 3 rings. We're trying to get that 4th and be the alpha of the league, and definitely relying on Locked On Fantasy Football, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. So, Gino, we talked a lot about Jalen Hurts in segment 1. We know, obviously, he's the key to the Eagles' success this year. You can say all of the main reasons for the collapse last year, but if Jalen kept playing at the level he was in the Chiefs game, the Bills game, Miami, Dallas, they weren't going to collapse the way they did. He is obviously the key, as is most quarterbacks across the NFL. What would you say, though, is the one unit, and I don't want to say across the board from week 1 to week 18, that's the biggest key, but what unit do you think, or you're going to be watching the most to see, do they get off to a fast start? Like, it's maybe the biggest question mark that's like, okay, this could really make or break if the Eagles have a fast start like they normally do.
I keep going back to how important the offensive line as a whole is getting off to a fast start, because there were moments early on in that season last year where they were taking penalties that were just out of sorts, and they didn't look well refined in the run game at points, and Jalen Hurts was getting hit way too many times last year. If you can just establish the run right out of the gate, keep Jalen Hurts upright, and allow this offense to operate efficiently, you're going to operate the MO of what Philadelphia wants to do. They want to win with offense. 2, you're going to put your brand new defensive coordinator and that defense, which has a lot of moving parts from last year, in a much better position to succeed, where you're not turning the ball over multiple times and putting them behind the 8 ball when it comes to field position. It has to be a good give and take, and it all starts with the offensive line, because the best seasons, Lou, it comes when the Eagles can do whatever they want in the trenches, and you see it when they can dent a defensive line and you're getting 2 to 3 yards a clip before you're even getting touched, and Jalen Hurts has 2.5+ seconds. That's where this Eagles team can be lethal, and it starts with those bullies in the trenches.
And it will be very interesting to see, like, right off the bat, okay, what do we have in this new center right guard combo?
Yep, exactly.
Cam Jurgens and Mekhi Becton. The Eagles normally have a lot of stability on the offensive line. They still do. 3/5 of this line are still elite, established starters long-term on this football team. And I think Cam Jurgens and Becton are going to be good, but that's a question mark the Eagles haven't had in a long time, Gino. So, yeah, I think it's going to be really fascinating to see how those two start off. And I think it's the same reason I'm very interested in the defensive line. Like, of course, you could say the secondary, too, with all the new moving parts, the return of CGJ, all these young corners, new linebackers as well. But, again, the Eagles' bread and butter, why they're dominant normally, why they start fast, is because the big boys, as you mentioned, in the trenches, do what they do. And there's a high ceiling, as we've mentioned on the show a lot, for the pass rushers, but there's also a lower floor. Like, what do the Eagles have in Bryce Huff, Josh Sweat? Are we going to get a different version of Jordan Davis and Milton Williams this year? Like, I really agree. I think the trenches, just to see, like, early on, okay, is this normally, like, is this your mom and dad's Eagles offensive and defensive line, or do we have a problem for the first time in a while? It's going to be interesting to see how those two units start off the season.
And I especially want to pay close attention to the defensive line when it comes to taking away the run, because in the last 2 years,
it's a good point. The second half last year was so bad.
Oh, it was abysmal. And even that first half last year, as opposed to the first half of Jordan Davis's rookie season, because when Jordan Davis was a rookie, if you looked at the splits of when he was fully healthy, when he was on and off the field, it was like a 5 to 6 yard difference when he was on the field of them allowing less yards in the run game. They were able to take away the A and B gap. If they can't do that and teams can establish the run against the Eagles, the game plan to beat Philly is what Washington did to them in 2022, is to hold onto the ball for 40 minutes, set your team up in short yardage situations where you can convert those 3rd and shorts, those 4th and shorts, which will keep the Eagles offense off the field. And how do you keep the Eagles pass rushers at bay, Lou? Well, you don't pass the football. You establish the run. They have to respect the run. Right. And then that allows you to set up the play action. And that's where the Eagles got killed in the middle of the field. So this defensive line, I think you put it best, because if you take away that run, you now have to force the hand, put these teams in 2nd long, 3rd and long situation to allow your speed ball like Bryce Huff to go get the quarterback, to allow Josh Sweat to just move guys off the line of scrimmage and get to the QB. That's where the game is won and lost. I mean, we're going back to how do you win football games? In the trenches. Start with the offensive line and defensive line. It's pretty simple.
And you can tell early on, Gino, like, where these guys are headed. Obviously, you don't want to make conclusions based on a game or two, but the first few games, you'll know if Bryce Huff can be a full-time. Like, okay, I'm getting the vibe that he can make plays against the runner. Hey, Josh Sweat is back to who he was in the beginning of 2023 and the end of 2022, not the end of last season. Let's see if Nolan Smith can take that step. You'll be able to tell early on if it feels and looks different.
You're going to see it right away, because you're playing a Green Bay team who they have a young, exciting offense. And if they have Josh Jacobs back there and AJ Dillon, and you're just getting picked apart, and they go for 300 yards on the ground or 250 plus like you've done against them multiple times, yeah, it's going to be evident, Lou. And then you're playing a Falcons team that next week against a high-profile running back in Bijan Robinson. So taking away that line of scrimmage, that's going to allow you to win the matchups all across the board, because that's going to take away the burden on your secondary, allow them to play free, fast, and physical. But it all starts up front, man. Look at 2022 and then look at the end of 2023. That gap it's miles apart how much better they played in that early part of 2022.
And it'll just take the pressure off. Look, I know for the first time in a long time, and I love it, Howie Roseman invested more in the back end of the defense than the front. He kind of went back to front instead of front to back. But you got to remember the timeline of this defense. The secondary is so young, and there's so many new starters that they're going to have some high highs this year, but they might have some low lows as well. And so I think to make sure, not to say the secondary is going to need to be carried this year, but to take the pressure off such a young unit, you would hope this defensive line, which is young in their own right, but they can carry the way they normally do, that allows your secondary to make plays. Of course, it's a direct relationship. One affects the other and vice versa. But I really do think like the defensive line, it would take a lot of pressure off if they can really ball out.
If you're going to look at it in a perspective of downs, like first, second, third down, you want your defensive line to win 2 out of those 3 downs, and then give your younger defensive back group, they just have to pick up 1 of those downs. Like you guys just have to win and hit your corner 3 from a defensive perspective, right? The defense, you have the investments. You know that the game is going to be run around Jalen Carter. Like you design your entire defense to run through that player. And then the other investments you put around them, yeah, man, they're going to let Bryce Huff off the leash. Like they have to let these guys just go and play the way that they want to. And it all starts up front.
And I do think, Gino, the Fangio level aspect of this conversation makes me feel a little bit better.
Because add coordinators to this.
Yeah,
man.
There's more question marks personnel-wise in the defensive line, but you see all the different stunts and blitzes that Fangio's drawing up, all the different disguised coverages as well. I trust for the first time in a long time that the coach can also help elevate this unit. And I think you have 4 really good blitzing linebackers that's going to really help this pass rush too.
You talk about the coordinators last year. Did they get out to the best start right
Like
away?
I never trusted Sean Desai was going to help cover up things when they were dealing with slot corner issues or linebacker issues. With Fangio, I trust if there's injuries, like they can get through a storm. Last year, I never believed that, no matter who the coordinator was on either side of the ball.
And it'll be interesting the first time that adversity does hit for this unit.
I'm
because
very curious to see what happens.
That's when the finger pointing started for this entire team. And it was like, oh, this coordinator's not doing their job. This coordinator's not doing their job. But hey, it's going to be so evident which one doesn't step up to the plate right away because they're both brand new. Last year, both of the guys weren't great. So it was like, your head coach has to do something here. Hopefully that's not the case now. Like if the coordinators get off to a fast start and Nick can just sit back and relax to an extent and do his 30,000 foot view on this team, that's how they're going to be set up to succeed. You lead from the top, man. And they did not have the leaders in place at the coordinator positions last year.
Totally agree. We'll go around the league coming up next to wrap up this Wednesday edition of Locked On Eagles, getting back into the quarterback position. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back.
This episode of LOE is brought to you by our friends over at Game Time. The other day, Lou, I went to Red Rocks for the first time, saw OAR, me and my wife's favorite band, and they sang our wedding song. It was the most magical experience, and I have to give all the credit to Game Time. That's where we got our tickets. Game Time is always offering the best deals. Heck, if you are a Dodgers fan or living in LA or just love baseball in general, one of the best deals that are ever running is a 50% off Labor Day offer for the Diamondbacks and Dodgers game. And if you live in Philadelphia and you want to get down to South Philly to see the Phils, to see the 76ers, to see the Eagles, there's only one place that I am going to send you to get your tickets, and it is Game Time. Take the guesswork out of buying concert tickets, theater tickets, sporting tickets, whatever you love. Download the Game Time app today, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed.
You know, Gino, it is crazy that the day that Jalen Hurts finally throws his first interception of training camp, and it's the last day of practice for the Eagles at the NovaCare Complex for camp, that I also looked around the league just to check in on what's going on at the quarterback position. And man, I will never have a worse year of takes than 2021. I will say it made for great content, but I'm looking around the league and how are the quarterbacks doing that I thought might be a better option over Jalen Hurts. And I'm looking at Justin Fields in Pittsburgh, and he's kind of what I thought Hurts would eventually become, right? A high floor mobile quarterback that's always limited as a passer. I'm looking at my guy Malik Willis is battling Mason Rudolph for a backup job, and Zach Wilson's backing up Bo Nix in Denver, and the list goes on and on. It is crazy that even Russell Wilson battling Justin Fields. The Eagles at one point wanted to trade for him. I know we've talked about it before, but looking at how good of a summer Hurts has had and then seeing how some of those guys are fighting for their NFL lives in different ways, man, a lot of it was luck, but aren't we grateful for the situation we're at quarterback where what we're talking about in segment 1 is the case where we do feel like we have our guy for a decade.
Thank God
it could
we're
have been
not
the
the
complete
GM.
opposite way. I mean, thank God I wasn't the GM that year.
I mean, thank God.
Yeah.
But at the same time, in this sport, you have to look at it wins and lessons. And I think Jalen Hurts and Josh Allen are like two of the most lesson-based quarterbacks that you
What do
might
you think is the
ever
biggest lesson you
look
take
at.
from that?
I think the biggest lesson you take from that is there's so much we will never know.
That's what
from
I
the
take away
outside
from
looking
it.
in.
Because when you evaluate Justin Fields or Zach Wilson or a lot of these guys, compared to Jalen Hurts, why they didn't pan out versus Jalen, like, I mean, you can understand now why it went that way, but at the time, I don't know how you could have seen this for one guy, not the other. I think support system has so much to do with it.
Support system and just patience, buying into the culture is super important.
Mindset's important to quarterback. I'm learning basically that there's just so many variables that anything can happen. It's so unpredictable.
Yeah, you're looking at 40% of the whole equation when you're looking at what they test on the field, the tape. I mean, I was down at the recruiting personnel symposium in Nashville a couple of weeks ago, and longtime Wyoming head coach Craig Bohl sat down with Josh Payton and did a sit-down discussion on the stage. And Craig Bohl said that when Buffalo was scouting Josh Allen, they went so in depth about the importance of, hey, not everybody's going to want to live in Buffalo. It's a climate that it's Western New York. You and I know more than anybody, man. It's going to be snowing more than it's going to be sunny. Are you going to be a guy that buys into not just living there during the football season, but being there all year long, buying into the culture? Those are questions that you and me and average Joe are never going to have any insight into until you hear it 3 or 4 years down the road. Because at the time you look at Zach Wilson, you're like, oh, look at this nice shiny Ferrari. This kid can chuck the ball over a freaking mountain. But if he doesn't love football and he doesn't have that killer mindset, that's something you and I are never going to find out until crap hits the fan and you got to go win a football game. And Josh Allen, Jalen Hurts, that winning mindset plus the skill set, dude, that's where you get killers in this league.
It's also open-mindedness is very important. Like, as a quarterback, you got to be willing to change. You got to be willing to improve, work on technique. I think that's something that hurt Carson Wentz. I think it's something that's still hurting Justin Fields to this day. Not that Fields has the wrong mental makeup. I think he does. Chicago loved him and just had the opportunity to take Caleb Williams. But his mechanics are still a massive problem. So is his footwork. Jalen took the time to fix that kind of stuff. Josh Allen digitally mapped his throwing motion after 2019, and look at the steps he took after that second season. So I don't know, man. It's a complicated process, and a lot of it's luck too. You just gotta find one, and when you find one, don't let it go. And I'm really hoping the Eagles found this one. I'm really hoping, and I believe Jalen's gonna have a big year. Again, I think normally it translates pretty well. If a quarterback has an elite summer like this, normally they don't just fall off the map. Like, you can kind of see it coming. Like 2020, you knew the end was kind of coming for Carson. But this, like, I think that an MVP type of year could be on the way.
We probably should have known this was coming when the whole Jalen Hurts is winning the locker room over Carson Wentz thing was starting to happen. And the one thing I want to say about that is authenticity in this business, Lou, might be the one thing that you have to look at, especially between Carson and especially between Jason, or why did I say Jason? I'm thinking Jason Kelsey, Jalen Hurts.
And Jalen adapted. Like, he was authentic, but he also adapted to what the team needed from him. Carson never, in that way, did that personality-wise.
That's what I was going to say. It all boils down to, can you let your ego go, man?
Adapt or die, man.
You have to put your ego to the side. I mean, Josh Allen knows nobody's going to take him down on a good day. Jalen Hurts knows nobody's going to stop him on a good day. But you can't walk around like you're the biggest swinging hoo-ha in the world. You have to put all that aside. And, AJ's making 30, Devontae's making 25, Jalen's making 55, your line's making more than anybody, but that doesn't mean a darn thing if they don't buy into what you are selling. And that starts with the city. It starts with buying into that mentality. Is Jalen Hurts a Philly guy? The way he plays, the way he goes about his business, you're darn right he is, man. And that's something that I wish we could see in the draft process, because I think we would fall in love with a lot of these guys a lot quicker just hearing how they...
Yeah, I think it's more difficult, like, to give us some credit. Like, we don't have that hands-on experience of learning, because maybe if I would have met with Jalen Hurts during the Combine, I would have probably had a completely different opinion.
100%, man.
Yeah, I mean, we're just going off pure tape, highlights, games we've watched, and hearsay. So I
And
think that's part of it too.
every position too. I think it's so important to look back on where it has gone and where it is going. Like trends are huge too. I mean, Jalen, is he ahead of the curve on the trend when they moved him to that position? Look at everybody else that's kind of come in behind him there at the quarterback position. It's young, fast, athletic, and be mobile. I mean, those are the first inklings, like the Josh Allen moveovers and the Jalen Hurts and the Lamar Jacksons. Like it's a different league too. So you have to adapt or die, or you're going to be left by the wayside and be competing for a backup job in Kansas City. No disrespect to Carson Wentz, man, but we all know what went down, and you got to be bigger minded in the grand scheme of things.
For sure. I think Jalen's going to have a big year in 2024. We'll see what happens. We got one more preseason game for you on Saturday. We'll cover the next 2 shows. Thanks so much for making Locked On Eagles your first listen each and every day. Until then, though, we're going to sign off. For Gino Camilleri, I'm Lou DiBiase. As always, thanks so much for downloading, watching, and listening, making us your first listen each and every day. Make sure Locked On Fantasy Football is your second listen. Let's go, Birds.
For 6 years, fly, Eagles, fly.